Researchers scanned over 40,000 people. Not surveys, not questionnaires, actual MRI scans showing exactly what was happening deep inside the human body. And what they found completely changed how we understand belly fat. It didn't just challenge old ideas, it rewired them entirely. Most people assume fat is fat. They think losing weight is the only goal. They believe the scale is the only number that matters. But a study published in Nature Communications revealed something different. Not all fat carries the same risk inside your body. Location matters far more than amount. In fact, fat stored around the hips may actually be protective. Meanwhile, fat packed around your internal organs was strongly linked to serious cardiometabolic disease. Two people can weigh exactly the same. Same BMI. Similar appearance. Completely different health outcomes. The only difference is where their fat actually lives. So here is the real question. What are you eating or drinking right now that is pushing your body to store fat in that dangerous internal space? There are 5 specific foods and drinks that research has consistently shown to funnel fat inward toward the organs over time. Most people have no idea. This is not about one bad meal. It is a slow and quiet process that builds over months and years without any obvious warning signs along the way. But we are going beyond the problem today. There are proven strategies that specifically target visceral fat. One study showed a 33% reduction in just 8 weeks. We are also going to settle the fructose debate completely. There is a massive difference between fructose from fruit and fructose from a bottle of soda. By the end of this, you will understand how your body stores fat and have a clear roadmap for changing it starting today. Let us begin. For most of the 20th century, scientists believed fat was relatively inert, just passive storage, calories sitting in tissue waiting to eventually be used. The old thinking was simple. Too much fat was a problem because it strained joints, stressed the heart, and made movement harder. That was basically the entire theory. Then in the late 1980s and through the 1990s, that entire understanding collapsed under the weight of new research coming from multiple directions at once. Scientists discovered fat tissue is not passive at all. It secretes hormones. It releases signaling molecules. It actively communicates with your brain, liver, immune system, and pancreas. Fat, it turned out, functions essentially like an organ. And like any organ, what it does depends heavily on where it sits inside your body. Subcutaneous fat sits just beneath your skin. It is the kind you can pinch. In modest amounts, it has a relatively benign hormonal profile overall. It secretes leptin, a hormone that signals fullness to the brain and helps regulate how much energy your body burns throughout the day consistently. In healthy people, this works well. The signal goes out. The brain responds. Appetite adjusts naturally. The system functions the way it was designed to function. In obesity, that signal breaks down. The brain stops responding to leptin properly. This is called leptin resistance. The whole regulatory system gets overwhelmed and stops working. Visceral fat operates by completely different rules. It wraps around your intestines, liver, kidneys, and pancreas. It behaves nothing like the fat under your skin. A paper published in NAS explained why visceral fat exists in the first place. The title said it plainly. It likely evolved as an immune buffer near the gut. Your gut is not sterile. It contains trillions of microorganisms. Many are beneficial. Some are potentially harmful. The gut lining is designed to keep bacteria out. Visceral fat sits right alongside this system and houses immune cells called macrophages. In a healthy body during an acute infection, this is genuinely useful defense. But the modern diet turns this ancient defense system into a serious liability. That is where things go badly wrong for most people eating today. When the gut lining becomes chronically damaged from poor diet, stress, alcohol, or ultra-processed foods, bacterial particles called LPs leak steadily into the bloodstream. The macrophages inside your visceral fat detect these particles and activate. They stay activated because the leakage never stops with a poor ongoing diet. The result is that visceral fat transforms from an immune buffer into an inflammation factory running constantly inside your body without you ever feeling it directly. It begins secreting inflammatory molecules called cytokines, including TNF-alpha and IL-6. These flood the entire body with inflammatory signals, not just locally, everywhere. This systemic inflammation is one of the most powerful drivers of chronic disease known to science, and visceral fat can sustain it indefinitely without obvious symptoms. Visceral fat also raises levels of a protein called RBP4. This protein directly blocks insulin receptors in your skeletal muscle from receiving insulin signals properly. When that signal is blocked, glucose cannot enter muscle cells efficiently. Blood sugar rises. The pancreas produces more insulin. The dysfunction compounds itself over time. So visceral fat is not just making your waistband tighter. It is actively generating inflammation and actively impairing insulin signaling every single hour of every day. A massive meta-analysis in the British Medical Journal reviewed 72 studies covering over 2.5 million participants. The numbers confirmed everything in plain and unmistakable terms. Larger thigh and hip circumference was linked to lower risk of death. Increased central fatness was associated with significantly higher mortality risk. Location is everything. Now we can look at exactly what pushes the body toward that dangerous internal fat storage pattern. And the first offender has been hiding in plain sight. Trans fats are partially hydrogenated oils. They are engineered fats made by forcing hydrogen into liquid vegetable oils to make them solid, shelf-stable, and extremely cheap. You might think trans fats are a solved problem. The FDA banned partially hydrogenated oils. Labels say 0 grams trans fat. But the regulatory loophole is significant. Products with up to 0.5 grams per serving can still be labeled as 0. Serving sizes are often manipulated to stay under that cutoff deliberately and legally. Ultra-processed foods, fast food, packaged baked goods, and certain margarines can still deliver meaningful daily doses across a full day of normal eating habits. A study in the journal Obesity followed 42 monkeys over 6 years. It used hydrogenated soybean oil. The control diet was perfectly matched in every single way. Same calories, same macronutrient ratios, only the type of fat was different. One group ate trans fats. The other group ate monounsaturated fats instead. 8% of total calories came from trans fats. That translates to roughly 15 to 20 grams daily for a human eating typical ultra-processed food. Very realistic. Over 6 years, the monkeys eating trans fats gained significantly more visceral fat and showed impaired glucose metabolism compared to the monounsaturated fat group consistently. The crucial finding was this. Total weight gain was essentially the same between both groups. Trans fats did not just cause more weight. They redirected where fat went. Trans fats changed the location of fat storage, not just the amount. Same calories, same weight gain, but the fat ended up in the most dangerous place internally. The second major offender is ultra-processed food. Not just because of what it contains, but because of what it does to your metabolic architecture over long periods. A study in clinical nutrition tracked 1,485 older adults in Spain and measured visceral fat alongside their ultra-processed food consumption over an extended observation period. Researchers divided participants into 3 groups based on intake levels. The highest group got about 15.6% of their total food intake from ultra-processed sources. Here is what makes that number important. This was Spain, a country with a deeply rooted food culture centered on fresh whole ingredients and traditional Mediterranean cooking. Even the heaviest ultra-processed food consumers in Spain were eating far less of it than the average American. And the association with visceral fat was already clearly visible. A British medical journal study estimated that Americans get approximately 60% of total energy from ultra-processed foods. In some demographics, that number is even higher. The mechanism connecting ultra-processed food and visceral fat runs directly through the gut microbiome. This is not a side note. It is the central story. Research published in Nutrition reviewed how ultra-processed foods damage the gut ecosystem in specific and measurable ways that compound significantly over time. Emulsifiers found in salad dressings, ice cream, and packaged breads disrupt the mucus layer of the gut lining and alter microbial community structure directly. Preservatives have direct antimicrobial effects. Artificial colorants interfere with beneficial bacterial species. Antibiotic residues from low-quality processed meat wipe out entire microbial populations. The cumulative result is gut dysbiosis, a destabilization of the entire microbial ecosystem inside your intestines that influences nearly every aspect of your metabolism. A study in the International Journal of Obesity profiled gut microbiomes in nearly 900 people and measured visceral fat using highly accurate DEXA body composition scans. The finding was completely unambiguous. Decreased microbial diversity was directly associated with increased visceral fat accumulation. The gut connection is not theoretical at all. Your microbiome is a metabolic signaling system. It tells your body whether it is safe and balanced or threatened and inflamed. Ultra-processed food disrupts that signal constantly. The third offender is sugar-sweetened beverages. Soda fits inside ultra-processed food broadly, but the evidence against it is specific and clean enough to stand alone. A study in the Journal of Nutrition tracked over 2,500 middle-aged adults. Daily soda consumption was associated with significantly greater visceral fat than in non-consumers. A separate study in obesity replicated this finding and added something important. The effect was specific to visceral fat. Subcutaneous fat did not show the same association. Something inside soda was directing fat specifically toward the organs and away from the periphery. To understand why, you need to understand an enzyme called lipoprotein lipase. Lipoprotein lipase, or LPL, governs where fatty acids get stored throughout the body. In insulin-sensitive people, subcutaneous LPL is more responsive to insulin signals. This means insulin naturally directs fat storage outward toward the hips and thighs. It is not perfect, but it is considerably safer than visceral storage. When insulin resistance develops, subcutaneous fat becomes less responsive. The insulin signal weakens there. Visceral LPL takes over. Fat storage shifts dangerously inward over time. Now add fructose. It makes up roughly half of the sugar in most sodas. Fructose activates glucocorticoids, including cortisol, which also activates LPL and visceral fat specifically. Here is the critical detail. Visceral fat has a higher concentration of glucocorticoid receptors than subcutaneous fat. It is literally more sensitive to cortisol signals than anywhere else. So you are getting two simultaneous signals: insulin resistance pushing fat inward, cortisol signaling activating fat storage specifically in visceral tissue. Together, these create a powerful compounding effect. A study in the Journal of Clinical Investigation tested this directly. Pure glucose beverages produced no change in visceral fat or insulin sensitivity over 10 weeks. Pure fructose beverages consumed for the same 10 weeks significantly increased visceral fat and measurably decreased insulin sensitivity. Same calories. Completely different biological outcomes throughout. It was never a calorie problem alone. It was always a fat partitioning problem driven by specific hormonal signals that most calorie counting approaches completely ignore. The fourth offender is fruit juice. And this is the one people genuinely do not want to hear because juice carries such a strong cultural association with health. Here is a fact worth repeating. Many fruit juices contain more fructose per serving than regular soda. That is not an exaggeration. The data is direct. A study published in Nutrition analyzed sugar composition across beverages. High fructose corn syrup beverages had fructose at 52% of total sugar content in them. Standard sugar sweetened beverages came in around 60% fructose. But 100% fruit juices came in at 67%. Grape, pomegranate, apple, and pear juice specifically. The distinction is not whether fructose came from fruit or a factory. The distinction is how it arrives inside your body and what biological systems it bypasses. In whole fruit, fructose arrives surrounded by fiber, water, micronutrients, and polyphenols. That food matrix slows absorption dramatically and activates multiple satiety signals naturally. In juice, all of that is gone. The juicing process physically removes the fiber and destroys the food matrix. Concentrated liquid fructose hits your bloodstream rapidly and directly. Your liver responds, your insulin system activates, your glucocorticoid receptors and visceral fat receive the signal. The same cascade as soda plays out biochemically. We will return to fructose from whole fruit shortly in the solutions section. The news there is genuinely reassuring. But juice is a different biological conversation entirely. The fifth and final offender is alcohol. The phrase beer belly exists for a real scientific reason that goes well beyond how many calories a drink contains. A study in the Annals of Nutrition and Metabolism assessed nearly 1,000 healthy adults using CT scans, which can precisely distinguish visceral fat from subcutaneous fat accurately. Higher alcohol intake was associated with substantially greater visceral fat mass. People consuming more than 14 standard drinks per week had significantly elevated metabolic syndrome risk. One standard drink is about 12 grams of ethanol. That is roughly a 12-ounce beer, a 5-ounce glass of wine, or a standard shot of spirits. A study in the World Journal of Gastrointestinal Pharmacology found women who drank frequently accumulated visceral fat at higher rates than men consuming equivalent amounts consistently. The female hormonal environment appears to be more sensitive to alcohol's fat partitioning effects. Even seemingly moderate regular drinking carries real visceral fat risk for women. The type of alcohol matters more than most people acknowledge. Beer appears to be worse than wine or spirits. The likely reason is estrogenic compounds from hops. Hops contain phytoestrogens. Estrogen is known to influence lipoprotein lipase activity and fat distribution patterns in ways that specifically favor visceral fat storage over time. Alcohol also disrupts sleep architecture, raises cortisol, inflames the gut lining, and promotes dysbiosis. The impact extends far beyond whatever calories are inside the drink itself. Now let us talk about what actually reverses this, because understanding the causes is only useful when it leads somewhere practical and genuinely achievable for real people. The first thing to understand is that you need to stop chasing the scale and start chasing the right target. Visceral fat and total body weight are different conversations. The Nature Communications study made this clear. Only visceral fat tracked with higher cardiometabolic disease risk. Subcutaneous fat did not show the same dangerous association at all. You can make profound progress on your actual health risk even when the scale barely moves, as long as visceral fat is measurably declining over time. The goal is less internal inflammation, less insulin resistance, and less visceral accumulation. Some of the most powerful strategies produce modest scale changes, but dramatic health improvement. The second strategy is combining intermittent fasting with protein pacing. A study in obesity tested this directly in 200 participants over 8 weeks with careful controls. One group followed standard calorie restriction, roughly 35% fat, 60% carbohydrates, low cholesterol, and 20 to 30 grams of fiber daily throughout the study. The second group used intermittent fasting combined with protein pacing. Fasting involved one 36-hour or 2 consecutive 60-hour reduced calorie periods weekly, with about 400 calories allowed. On non-fasting days, they ate around 1,800 calories with 35% protein, 35% carbohydrates, and 30% fat split across 4 daily meals consistently. Both groups ate essentially the same total calories. The difference was timing, protein distribution, and the structure of eating across the week over 8 weeks. Both groups improved. Both lost weight, reduced fat mass, improved blood pressure, and blood lipids. Calorie restriction genuinely worked for multiple meaningful health markers, but the combined approach worked far better. Visceral fat dropped 33% in the fasting plus protein group, only 14% in calorie restriction alone. Same calories. The combined group also preserved more lean muscle mass, reported better dietary quality of life, and saw their desire to eat drop by 17% during the study. The calorie restriction group experienced no such decrease in hunger drive. One approach was fighting biology. The other was actually changing how the body signals hunger. A study in nutrition and metabolism explains why protein is so critical here. Higher protein intake consistently promotes satiety through overlapping hormonal and physiological mechanisms that compound together. Satiety hormones increase, thermogenesis rises, gastric emptying slows. Adherence becomes easier not through willpower, but because the appetite signals themselves have actually shifted measurably. The third strategy is adopting a Mediterranean diet with elevated polyphenol intake. If you want a long-term pattern rather than a structured fasting protocol, this is it. A BMC study recruited 294 participants and ran an 18-month intervention. 3 groups, standard healthy guidelines. Traditional Mediterranean diet. High polyphenol Mediterranean diet with added green tea daily. The healthy guidelines group lost essentially no weight but still reduced visceral fat area by 2% over 18 months just from improving overall diet quality. The standard Mediterranean group lost 2.7% body weight and reduced visceral fat by 6%. Already a more favorable outcome than standard healthy eating guidelines alone. The high polyphenol group lost 3.9% body weight, but reduced visceral fat by 14%. The fat was leaving the dangerous space far faster than the scale moved. Higher blood polyphenol levels correlated directly with greater visceral fat loss. The microbiome was processing these polyphenols into metabolites that influenced fat storage patterns directly. You do not need a specialized plant shake. Dark berries, dark chocolate, coffee, green tea, walnuts, pecans, flaxseed, turmeric, and artichoke are all high in polyphenols. The fourth strategy is building gut signals through fiber. Fiber may be the most underrated lever for visceral fat reduction that most people overlook almost entirely today. An obesity research paper tracked roughly 1,000 people with CT scans over 5 years. For every 10-gram increase in daily soluble fiber, visceral fat accumulation dropped by 4%. That is a meaningful effect from simply eating more beans, oats, apples, and lentils regularly. Simple, affordable, and accessible to virtually everyone, regardless of budget or location. The mechanism runs through gut bacteria. Soluble fiber feeds bacterial populations that ferment it into short-chain fatty acids including acetate, propionate, and butyrate. These are signaling molecules. A Journal of Lipid Research study showed short-chain fatty acids regulate the balance between fat synthesis and fat oxidation in the liver, shifting the body toward burning. Research in the journal Gut showed butyrate can reduce appetite and activate brown adipose tissue through a gut-brain neural circuit. Brown fat burns energy rather than stores it. Think of fiber as raw material and your microbiome as a factory. You supply the material. The factory produces metabolic signals that tell your body which mode to run in. Feed the factory poorly, and the signals work against you. Feed it well consistently, and it does remarkable metabolic work on your behalf without requiring any willpower at all. Now for the fructose question from fruit. This is where real confusion lives, and where many people make unnecessary restrictions that actually hurt their overall dietary outcomes. Earlier, we covered how fructose in beverages drives visceral fat through insulin resistance and cortisol signaling. That evidence is solid, and it stands completely without question. But a study in the journal Metabolism randomized obese participants to either a low fructose diet under 20 grams daily or a moderate fructose diet from whole fruit. The fruit group consumed 50 to 70 grams of fructose daily entirely from whole fruit. Both groups were in a caloric deficit. Both lost weight over 6 weeks. The natural fructose group actually lost more weight. They lost 9.2 pounds compared to 6.2 pounds in the low fructose group. More fructose. Better weight loss outcomes. Whole fruit surrounds fructose with fiber, water, micronutrients, and polyphenols. These collectively slow absorption, activate satiety hormones, and regulate how much you actually consume naturally. It is genuinely difficult to overconsume fructose from whole fruit. Your body fills up. Satiety signals fire. You stop eating. The whole system regulates itself automatically and effectively. Juice removes every one of those breaks. It concentrates fructose, strips fiber, destroys the food matrix, and delivers a rapid dose to the liver without any biological regulation. So eat the fruit, all of it. Berries, apples, pears, oranges, mangoes. The fructose in whole fruit is not your enemy. Liquid fructose from any source is entirely different. On alcohol, the evidence is strong enough to take seriously. The most practical first move is a meaningful reduction, particularly in beer given its estrogenic compound content. Kava acts on GABA receptors in a way that produces real relaxation without intoxication or metabolic disruption. Hop water delivers a similar sensory experience with botanical adaptogens instead. Neither is a perfect substitute for everyone, but both represent real and usable options for people genuinely trying to reduce alcohol's ongoing contribution to visceral fat accumulation over time. Here is the full picture stripped clean of complexity. Visceral fat is not a cosmetic problem. It is metabolic. It is immunological. It actively reshapes your entire hormonal environment. 5 things push your body toward visceral storage over time. Trans fats, ultra-processed foods, sugar-sweetened beverages, fruit juice, alcohol. Each works through overlapping and compounding mechanisms. They disrupt the microbiome, trigger insulin resistance, activate cortisol-driven fat partitioning, and create a chronic inflammatory state that makes visceral accumulation easier with every passing year. 5 strategies pull powerfully in the opposite direction. Target visceral fat directly. Combine intermittent fasting with protein pacing. Optimize polyphenols through a Mediterranean diet. Build fiber intake consistently. Eliminate liquid fructose completely while keeping whole fruit entirely in the picture. These are not extreme measures. They are targeted signals to a body that is always listening. Your body is not random. It is responding every moment to the signals you give it through food. Change the signals consistently, and the body changes where it stores fat. Not because of willpower, not because of pure calorie mathematics, but because the metabolic environment that made visceral accumulation the path of least resistance has been fundamentally and measurably changed. That is the real lever. Not a number on a scale, not a dramatic before and after. A shift in what your biology is being told to do from the inside out. And now you know exactly where that lever is and precisely how to use it starting with your very next meal.